Hello everyone. In today's case, a teen would travel across the country to explore her newfound adulthood and would mysteriously vanish without a trace or a spot of evidence, making this yet another tragically unsolved case. Kristen Deborah Modafferi was born June 1st of 1979 in Danbury, Connecticut, to her mother Debbie, who was a teacher, and her father Bob, who was an electrical engineer, and she'd also go on to have 3 sisters. Despite being born in Connecticut, when she was around 10 years old, the family would uproot and move to Charlotte, North Carolina. Kristen was said to be a gifted student who skipped a grade in elementary school and would go on to win a distinguished 4-year scholarship at North Carolina's State University. Her mother Debbie saying that she was very bright. She even traveled as far as Russia to sing with her high school chorus. She was also curious and open to new experiences. Kristen was the second oldest of 4 girls. Her sisters Allison and Lauren remembered singing a cappella songs with her. Megan, Kristen's youngest sister, remembered making Play-Doh and reading. Now I'm going to play for you a speech that Kristen ended up doing during high school where she talked about safe sex.
Spur-of-the-moment sex is portrayed as fun and natural, while the possible consequence of unplanned pregnancy is rarely addressed. Contraceptive use is even more rarely addressed on network television. Paid messages advocating the intelligent use of birth control are banned, and public service announcements tend to be broadcast only late at night, when few people are watching. A publication of the National Academy of Sciences states that the media provides young people with lots of clues about how to be sexy, but little information about how to be sexually responsible.
Kristen was said to have a very beautiful, idyllic life growing up. Her parents were high school sweethearts from New Jersey who had been married for 30 years. They'd settle into a 5-bedroom colonial-style home after relocating to Charlotte for Bob's work. The home was said to be on a street lined in crepe myrtle and dogwood trees, in a neighborhood full of families. She was always safe there, and you could probably say she lived a more sheltered upbringing. She was definitely more book smart than street smart. In 1997, Kristen had just finished her freshman year at North Carolina State University, and she decided that for the summer she wanted to travel solo to the San Francisco Bay Area so that she could study photography at the University of California, Berkeley. She'd even paid for the $900 class out of her own savings. Using Craigslist, Kristen would find a room to rent for $500 a month in a house located at 274 Jane Avenue in Oakland. She'd be moving in there with 4 male roommates who were all young professionals, one being a 24-year-old website designer named Griffin Cherry. Now, San Francisco was actually a place that Kristen had traveled to a few years earlier with her family, around 1994, so it wasn't like she was completely unfamiliar with the city. Considering Kristen was only 17, her mother Debbie wasn't very comfortable with those summer plans, allowing her underage daughter to travel across the country alone. Debbie saying, quote, "I didn't want her to go. I was a little leery about the whole thing. I remember saying, I don't know, Kristen, I'm not so sure about this. And she said, oh, Mom, you're not going to stop me from going, are you? I really want to do this. I relented. I thought maybe she could have used a couple more years of maturing." End quote. However, Kristen's father, Bob, thought that this would be a very good experience for her. So on June 1st of that year, Kristen would move herself to San Francisco on her 18th birthday. Within a few days, she ended up lining up a job at Spinelli's, a coffee shop inside the Crocker Galleria in the financial district. She also got some part-time work at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Early each morning, she'd catch the transit system, which is called BART, from 19th Street for her 7 a.m. shift at Spinelli's. And after clocking out at 3 p.m. every day, she would end up going exploring, often taking her camera with her and photographing ethnic areas of the city. She loved to go to art galleries and the beaches, and she even signed up for belly dancing lessons. She was honestly doing amazing for someone who had literally just turned 18. She was freshly an adult, and she went across the country, got herself jobs. She immediately jumped into making friends and getting to do activities and exploring. It was honestly very impressive. She was living her best life in a brand new city that was drastically different than the city she'd grown up in North Carolina. A few days into her trip, Kristen ended up going to a concert at Shoreline, a live 105 music festival featuring Blur and Fiona Apple. Once the show was over, Kristen realized that she'd actually missed her last train back home, and so she was considering if she should sleep on a bench in the train station. While she was trying to decide what to do, a young man that she had met at the concert ended up piping in and telling her that that would be dangerous for her to sleep on a bench here, and so he offered to split a cab with her back to his brother's home. And so the two would end up getting a ride back to the apartment, and as far as I seen, Kristen ended up sleeping on the couch. In the morning, she woke up as usual and headed off to her shift at Spinelli's. But I think this is an example of how trusting Kristen was, a little possibly too overly trusting of strangers, and it would later make people wonder how many strangers did she trust blindly like this. At one point during those weeks, Kristen would end up going to an art gallery with a coworker from Spinelli's. While there, the coworker would snap this photo of Kristen, where you can see her admiring the art. This is thought to be the last photo ever taken of Kristen. On Monday, June 23rd of 1997, just 23 days after Kristen had arrived in San Francisco, Kristen would go through her normal routine. She would wake up early, leave her apartment, and catch the train to work. While at work, Kristen would ask a coworker for directions to the Land's End Trail area, saying she may attend a party there. Now, this was apparently a bit of an odd question because she had apparently actually just went to a party there a couple days prior, and it was said to be a summer solstice party at Ocean Beach, which is somewhat in the area of where she was asking for. But it makes me wonder, maybe she was asking this question because she didn't go to that beach from work. Maybe she went from a different location, so she wanted to know which buses possibly to take to get there from work. But according to this coworker, despite Kristen asking these questions about directions, she seemed non-committal about the plans of going there after work. Around 3 p.m., Kristen finished her shift, which was the normal time she would, and she'd leave work in her black Spinelli's logoed t-shirt, a long-sleeved blue plaid flannel shirt, tan pants, and possibly high-top Fly London sneakers. She also had a green JanSport backpack with a couple of library books inside. About 30 minutes after Kristen left Spinelli's, a male coworker would claim to have seen Kristen walking on the second floor of the Crocker Galleria in conversation with a blonde woman. Now, this coworker didn't recognize the woman, and they noted that it was very strange to have seen Kristen there talking to someone still, because every time Kristen left work, she'd typically leave the mall immediately. She wouldn't linger around. And this coworker may have had a right to be concerned because the very next day, Kristen would fail to show up to her first day of classes at UC Berkeley. Now, despite this being extremely uncharacteristic of her, Kristen was not that kind of person. As you can tell from everything that I've just said, she seemed to be a very responsible young woman. But unfortunately, her roommates and coworkers didn't really know her that well yet. She'd only known them for 20 days. So they didn't seem to be immediately alarmed by her absence. It would also be noted that she'd failed to pick up a $400 check from work. 3 days after she was last seen, Kristen's parents would end up receiving a phone call from one of Kristen's roommates, Griffin Cherry, who stated that he hadn't seen her since Monday, June 23rd, but that they'd waited to call because they thought she was out with friends. But when she didn't come home after a couple days, they began to worry. This was an immediate red flag to Kristen's parents, who jumped on the first plane that they could get to San Francisco and went immediately to the police station to try to report her missing. But when they arrived at the Oakland Police Department, they were immediately gave the runaround, which seems to be a very unfortunate trend in a lot of these cases. Debbie saying, quote, "He basically told us that it was no big deal, that Kristen was just one more runaway, and that postponing the search for a couple days wouldn't make a difference." End quote. Now, what Debbie was actually referring to in that statement is that Kristen's case was given to 2 specific detectives, but those detectives were gone for the weekend. They were basically on break. They basically had the weekend off. It was their time off, break, whatever. And so whoever they spoke to at the police department essentially told them, Kristen will be fine for another couple days. She's probably just out there somewhere. It's not going to make a difference now. So we should just wait till Monday when those cops get back from their weekend, and then we'll start maybe looking at stuff, which is absolutely ridiculous. On top of that, it seems like the Oakland Police Department was just way too overloaded with the amount of cases that they had. Apparently, they had gotten 25 cases handed to them that exact same day, and there were upwards of 800 missing people in the area. So to them, Kristen truly was just a number. And since she technically was an adult, she had just turned 18 3 weeks prior, she wasn't a top priority. Since police weren't doing anything, Kristen's parents weren't going to just sit around and wait, so they ended up heading over to the home where she was renting a room. In her room, a letter from her younger sister was said to be found sitting undisturbed by her bed. Some of Kristen's clothing was hanging on a drying line out in the backyard as if she was going to be home later that last day she was seen to put it away. Debbie and Bob then attempted to talk to her roommates to try to figure out what her routine was. And when Monday finally came back, the two ended up marching back to the police station trying to convince police that Kristen wasn't an addict or homeless or living a high-risk lifestyle. There was nothing to merit that she would have ran away or would have went off grid somewhere. But instead, she was the opposite. She was a very hardworking young girl who had plans, she had goals, and it was very uncharacteristic for her to just disappear like that out of nowhere. They were fighting to have their daughter's case investigated. Now, as far as I've seen, the family would end up hiring a PI that would end up interviewing her roommates and her coworkers before the police did. because again, it seems like police weren't really looking into this. And from what I also read, the police didn't even start taking her case seriously until they found out a PI had been hired, and her parents were in the police station once again begging for them to do something, and they ended up winning over a new detective who was part of the missing persons department, who would end up bumping Kristen's case up to the top. Meanwhile, Debbie and Bob were doing what they could to search for their missing daughter throughout this massive city. They began handing out flyers and canvassing the streets. A billboard would eventually be put up, hoping for tips, and her family tried as hard as they could to get the media to spread the word.
I'd spent many hours on the phone calling all the television programs to try to get our story out. People need to know that there's not just Lacey Peterson missing out there. There are many others.
That young man that Kristen had spent the night with after the concert would end up being tracked down and questioned, but he would later be cleared. And the stories that her new circle of friends were telling and her roommates, they all seemed to be pretty consistent, and they didn't raise any red flags with authorities. So from what I see, the roommates were also cleared. However, that unknown blonde woman that Kristen's coworker claimed to have seen her with just after work has never been identified. Now, interestingly enough, when police ended up searching Kristen's room, they would end up finding a copy of the San Francisco Bay Guardian in the trash can. On this newspaper, an article ended up being circled that read, quote, "Female seeking friends to share activities who enjoy music, photography, working out, walks, coffee, or simply the beach, exploring the Bay Area. Interested? Call me." End quote. And this ad had been placed in a newspaper published on June 18th of 1997, just days before Kristen disappeared. By the time investigators ended up finding this lead, they tried contacting the newspaper. However, they had already wiped all their files, so they weren't able to figure out who the person was that placed the ad in the newspaper. However, my big question is, did anyone ever try calling the phone number that was associated with it to track the person down? Because there was a phone number on the ad, but I didn't see anywhere, written anywhere, talked about anywhere, police trying to call that phone number. You'd think that'd be the first thing you would do. So it makes me wonder, maybe they tried it and it was no longer in service, but you'd think they'd say something. And if it was in service, they should be able to figure out whose phone number it was. There was a lot of talk as well if Kristen had placed that article, but I don't see why she would circle it and throw it in the trash can if she was the one to place that article. And then also, wouldn't they be able to determine if it was her phone number on the article? You know what I mean? After this, a bloodhound would end up being brought in, and using articles of Kristen's clothing, the dog ended up being taken to the Crocker Galleria to see if it could track her from there. When brought there, it said that the dog went to the door and headed west into the Tenderloin. And it was consistent with their theory that Kristen may have taken the 38 Gary Mooney to the beach. Her trail was also picked up near the end of the bus route at Sutro Heights Park, but the dog would lose it along the beach beyond the Sutro Baths ruins. What was scary though is that this trail ended at a rocky promenade overlooking the ocean. It's unclear, though, if Kristen was heading down there after work like she'd asked the coworker the directions for, if there was even a party that was meant to happen there that night. Coast Guards would be brought in as well at this point in time to scour the area, however, nothing was turned up. Now, something very strange would happen about a month after Kristen disappeared. On July 10th, an editor at KGO TV would receive a phone call from an anonymous person that claimed that, quote, "Two jealous lesbians had killed Kristen in a car near the Old Tower Records store on Mark Street in the Castro, before driving over the Golden Gate Bridge and dumping her body by a wooden bridge on the way to Point Reyes." End quote. The caller also named 2 employees at the San Francisco YMCA as the killers. The man that placed this call would later be identified as John Onuma, described as a short, 36-year-old man with hair down to his waist. At first, he would deny making this phone call, but then he would eventually admit to it, and it would be revealed that John only lived a mile from Kristen's work. Now, police would look into this whole theory that John submitted about these 2 lesbian women, but they would end up being cleared, and it would turn out that he had actually lied about these claims because he felt like these 2 women had conspired to get his girlfriend Jill Lampo fired from work. But John Onuma was a lot scarier than just a white lie. Scarily, when investigators looked into John's background, they would find out that he had been placing classified ads in the newspapers. And when women would respond to these classified ads, they would later claim that John then coerced them into having sex, or he would steal money from them. However, none of these women initially reported him because they feared retaliation from him. Which, when I heard this, it really made me wonder, could John have been the one to place that ad in the newspaper that Kristen circled? Could he have pretended to be a woman placing an ad looking for female friends in order to trick another young woman, such as Kristen, to befriending him? To make matters worse, in 1999, John would be featured in an episode of America's Most Wanted after 3 women claimed they were held against their will and tortured by John. And this alleged torture supposedly included sleep deprivation and being burned. In the episode, one woman would call John a human vampire. Another claimed she was his sex slave, and then a third woman claimed that he beat her when she tried to escape. One woman claimed John told her, quote, "You know I'm going to have to kill you. I can't let you go. Now you know what happened to Kristen Modafferi." End quote. Searches of John's apartment would later reveal large amounts of blood found, although it was later determined through DNA testing that this blood belonged to a cat. Which, why would anyone have a large amount of blood in their apartment from a cat? It was giving me Luca Magnotta vibes when I read that. And I might have seen in another article that John had killed his cat when he had a fight with his girlfriend, something like that. It was just very scary, talk a lot about serial killers, killing animals before they move on to humans. And I don't know, I'm just saying, it's a little strange. No normal person should have large amounts of cat blood in their apartment. Another very strange connection between John and Kristen is that John's girlfriend Jill had previously dated a man named Matthew Look, who was actually friends with one of Kristen's coworkers. And when police ended up calling Matthew to inquire about Kristen, they claimed he was hostile and told them not to call him ever again. Despite all of this very strange information, police say that John is not currently a suspect, and he actually is last known to be living in Hawaii in 2018. John says that he messed up by, inserting himself in the investigation and making up that lie about those 2 lesbian women that worked at the YMCA, and that him doing that is the whole reason that, police made the case about him at first and led police to looking at him, which is just very strange that he would insert himself anyways, but eventually the FBI would be brought in, but they wouldn't uncover any new evidence of foul play either, so in 2010, their case ended up being closed. In 2015, a cadaver dog would end up being brought to the home where Kristen had been renting with her roommates on Jane Street. And this dog actually ended up alerting to the scent of human decomposition. So police would end up digging up the area, but they didn't find anything. Considering a lot of the theories surrounding Kristen's disappearance revolve around her not returning home after work that day and her going towards the beach, which is also where the dogs tracked her to there, it's honestly not really known why the dog alerted. But it would turn out that the owner of this dog was actually a former police sergeant, and he would inform police that they should re-interview the roommates, as well as excavate a concrete slab in the basement. The thing with the basement seemed to be that despite this concrete slab that was down there, the rest of the floor was this hard packed clay, which would have been very, very hard to have dug up and then, buried someone in. So that concrete slab was the thing that was really in question. In 2017, a forensic anthropologist would be brought to the home to scan it with a proprietary device that he had developed, which detected human decomposition chemicals. The device ended up pinpointing between 274 Jane Avenue and the house next door, 278 Jane Avenue, the results indicating a likely crime scene more than a burial. Additionally, it was said that a chemical signature denoting the presence of human blood was discovered near a concrete slab at the base of the porch steps at the 278 Jane Avenue residence. DNA testing in 2018 would reveal that the decomposing material that was found matched that of Bob and Debbie Modafferi, who had submitted their DNA to be tested. It would also turn out that that house next door from the one Kristen had been renting was actually a halfway house for convicted drug offenders and other felons. And police actually never looked into that in the initial investigation.
And he alerted on every vent on both sides of the house that go into the basement.
Private investigator Paul Dosty says there are human remains under this Oakland home on Jane Avenue. Buster is trained to smell it.
As far as I'm concerned with the dog, 100%. It's human decomposition.
The remains could be those of Kristen Modafferi, an 18-year-old college student from North Carolina. She worked in San Francisco and was last seen leaving her job at the Crocker Galleria in 1997. Modafferi rented at the Oakland home, news to the current tenants.
Obviously, I hope that they picked up a clue that helps them find her.
The homeowner allowed Dosty and Buster inside.
It's just a big clock.
Oakland police investigated the house in 1997, but found nothing. There are concrete slabs and dirt in the basement, which may have drained downhill in the last 2 decades. Buster first detected a scent at the end of a drainage pipe.
Anything that we can look at, we're going to be open to looking at it.
A crime scene technician photographed, and Dosty took soil samples from the basement and backyard. Modafferi's parents eagerly await the results, which could take 30 days.
And this one like it certainly could be something that could put closure, if nothing else, to what happened to our daughter.
OPD says they'll be in contact with Dosty, but at this time, it's still a missing person case.
In 2014, Debbie and Bob would move to Florida to enjoy their retirement. Sadly, after spending 6 sunny years in Florida, Bob would be diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. And in the spring of 2022, the last of his treatment options would fail, and he would sadly pass away without knowing what happened to his daughter. Debbie saying, quote, "When Bob passed away, I was saying goodbye to him. I told him to please give hugs from all of us to Kristen. Please give Kristen hugs from all of us. I'm praying they're together." End quote. Debbie is now in her 70s, and the chances of her getting answers is also getting narrower. So if you have any information as to what happened to Kristen, if you know anything, please speak up and say something. One positive thing that came out of this, if you want to look at positives, is something called Kristen's Law, which was introduced and signed into law by Bill Clinton in the year 2000. The law was created because of how little resources there were due to Kristen no longer being considered a missing child at that point in time because she had just turned 18. Again, just 3 weeks before her disappearance. It's so scary to think that, one day after someone turns 18, they're no longer considered a missing child then if they go missing, and everything is just out the door. It's like they don't matter as much. So Kristen's Law would provide assistance to law enforcement as well as family members in missing persons cases where the person was over 17 years old. It also authorized $1 million per year to support organizations, including the National Center for Missing Adults. However, the center's federal funding would end up running out in 2005 when Kristen's Law expired. But after this, it would be continued with volunteer efforts. I think the biggest takeaway from this case is that Kristen did not run away. I think we can all agree upon that. It wasn't like she was being held down somewhere and had a reason to run away. She was an adult legally now, and, she was doing everything she had dreamed of. She flew across the country to pursue photography, and she was, going to museums for that. She got to go and take pictures after work every day and just do whatever she wanted, really. She was signing up for classes, making new friends, going to parties, going to concerts. She was literally living her best life in those 3 weeks. So there's no reason that she would have just vanished. She had all of the freedom and all the opportunity to do what she wanted, and she could have told her parents, and they couldn't do anything to stop her. They wouldn't have done anything to stop her. A big theory in Kristen's case is that she may have gotten on the bus to go to that beach trail where she'd asked directions to from her coworker so that she could go take photos there after work like she'd often do. So is there a possibility she may have been taking photos, slipped and fell off the ledge and fell into the ocean and was washed away? The fact that it took so long for investigators to investigate and for even the waters to be searched, by then her body could have washed off anywhere and just not been found. On the other hand, I am very concerned about that newspaper clipping that was found in her room circled. It makes me wonder if after work that day, that coworker seen her talking to a blonde woman because the blonde woman was the person who placed that ad in the newspaper. And possibly that blonde woman had bad intentions. It also makes me wonder how sure that coworker was that he seen Kristen there. Could he have mistaken her? It wasn't actually Kristen, and Kristen could have went off and met up with someone else from that ad because, as we've seen, she was very trusting with strangers. She was making new friends. She was going to new events and outings. Maybe she's seen this, ad in the newspaper and thought, hey, I could use another friend, especially a female friend, since she was, rooming with a bunch of guys. So maybe she thought this would be a good opportunity. And from the description of the article, liking the beach and photography and things like that, that was all things that Kristen also loved. So she might have thought, this might be my new best friend here. I'm going to go meet up with this person and see what happens. And maybe this person had bad intentions. I do find it strange that the dog tracked all the way to the beach. So it makes me wonder, could the dog have tracked there because she had been in that area before and her scent might have been all around the area outside of the work there and at the beach because she'd been to those places recently? Or was it because she did go that way? Maybe she went there with that stranger from the newspaper ad, and maybe something happened after that, and that's why her scent ended. Could she have been kidnapped from there by maybe someone waiting in a vehicle? They got her out of the city into a more wooded area and then did something to her. Maybe once they got there, they took some pictures and then this new friend suggested they go off somewhere else, and that's when she was kidnapped. It would make sense to me. This individual might have gotten to know her better over that little small span of time if they did go to the beach area. Maybe Kristen mentioned how she was new to town and how she didn't have any friends. She didn't have any family there. And this person thought, this would make the perfect victim. And that's when they acted on it. What I do find strange, though, is that the cadaver dogs later hit at her home, at the place she was renting on Jane Avenue. Why would there be DNA matter that was tested there that matched her parents' DNA? That's very strange to me, and it makes me wonder, could the roommates have been involved? Could it have been someone from the halfway house next door then? Because it seems like she might have been killed there, but her body was disposed of elsewhere possibly. But with such little evidence in Kristen's case, I think it does make it hard to try to sway one way or another. But they seem to have something at least. They have a little bit of something, especially with these cadaver dogs and now these new advances with DNA testing on that home. What do you all think? Have you heard of this case before? Do you know any information that I don't know? Where do you sway with this? I want to know, so I'll be in the comment section chatting with you all. But what I do hope is that answers eventually come. Let's take one more good look at Kristen because maybe it'll spark someone's memory. Kristen is described as standing 5'6" tall and around 140 pounds, with brown eyes and dark brown shoulder-length hair. She was last seen wearing a black Spinelli's t-shirt, a long-sleeve blue plaid flannel shirt, tan pants, and possibly high-top fly linen sneakers. She had a green JanSport backpack with a couple of library books inside. Kristen would now be around 45 years old, and this is an age progression photo of how she'd possibly look at 36 years old. Another thing I really do find odd is this John character. I really wonder if there's more to him, if there's more to his involvement. Why insert yourself in the investigation when he didn't have to? I get that he wanted to get revenge against these ladies that apparently wronged his girlfriend. But then why are there so many accusations against him of holding women captive and torturing them? And then one of these women claimed that he threatened them, saying that he had killed her. It's very odd to me. It's very strange. So is there a possibility that John also could be involved? I really wonder what his alibi is and how solid it was the day she disappeared. As always, if you know something, please say something. I'll have the information for the Oakland Police Department down below. My heart goes out to this family. I truly hope they get answers. And as always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.